Hi, in this demo we're going to talk about the techniques necessary to enable AirDrop in iOS 7 for sending and receiving files, content. So I've got a very simple interface. This might be the heart of a chat application or a file sending and file sharing application that would have to be enabled or installed on two devices so that they could communicate via AirDrop. Both of the devices, as I already explained, have to be iOS 7 devices. In other words, devices upon which the iOS 7 operating system is installed. So I've got a simple text view here under the status bar. Remember that views go all the way under the status bar, so we need to make sure that this text view does not go into the status bar, because I can do this and put it all the way up underneath the status bar. That would not be good. There is a guideline that's provided, and we can see that here. If I move this text view up, I snap to this guideline right here, and that provides the 20 pixel status bar that we need. Okay, so a text view and then two buttons, save and send. I have unchecked enabled on the send button, and we can see that by scrolling down. And let's see, not hidden, but here, enabled. So I've unchecked enabled. The send button will only be enabled after I save the content in the text view. So now what's happening here? In the view controller, I have declared two outlet properties, one for the text view and one for the send button. And then I've also declared a property, an NSURL called file URL. I have two action methods, save clicked and send clicked, and those are pretty simple. So let's go ahead and look at the implementation of these methods. Save clicked takes whatever is in the text view and saves it to a file. So the first thing we want to do is reassign the first responder on the keyboard. And then we need to get the document directory, which we've done several times before. It's the object at index 0 from the NS document directory for the NS user domain mask. So we get that as a path. And then we append the file name. Now in this case, and probably in a chat client, we would just append the content to the same file. Here we're just writing into the same file over and over, and I've just called it savefile.txt. And then I make that into a URL. So the file URL property becomes a file URL with the path of that file path. That message is passed to NSURL, which returns a URL. And then I go ahead and write the file. I write the file to the URL. The file is going to be in self.tv content, that's the text view of content, .text, which is an NS string property, and then we write to URL with that file URL atomically, yes, I'll talk about that more in a second, with a UTF-8 encoding, a regular car star type encoding, and then in a production app we would probably trap this error, make an NS error, and then if something goes wrong, we would have the description and so forth of that error. And then I enable the send button. Now that I've saved, I can send. Now let's talk just a moment about what this atomically property does, or this parameter does. If we say no, it will just write the file directly out to the file system. It will write it out to the document directory without going into any intermediate steps. What yes does here is it ensures that if something interrupts this app, the file will still be written. It caches it out to memory before it writes it. It writes it to an intermediate file and then writes that file out to the documents directory. So now send click is just going to take the URL and send it. So how do we send it? It's going to send it via AirDrop. Actually, what it's going to do is send it and allow the user to say how they want to send it. If AirDrop is enabled and AirDrop detects that any other devices around it within range are also enabled for AirDrop, then AirDrop will be an option. By default, you have the ability to send via regular mail. So we turn the sender off. We turn send clicked, or the send button, off again. We turn it enabled to equal no. And then we pass the URL to a new UI Activity View Controller. UI Activity View Controller is not something we've talked about very much, but what it is a simple interface that has activities that are enabled by default for a certain thing. So we can pass data to a UI Activity View Controller, and then that view controller will come up over the existing interface and ask us how we want to handle that data. And it's pretty smart. So we're just making a new one. I'm calling it Send Activity. We allocate it and we initialize it with a couple of things. The first parameter here, in it with activity items, that parameter is an NS array of the data objects that we want to use with this activity. In this case, it's just the file URL. So I'm using this NS array in place syntax, at and then bracket. And if I needed more objects here, I would add them comma separated. When I do this, I'm declaring an NS array. It only has one element in this case, but I don't have to terminate this with a nil. So this is a nice syntax to just make a NS array in place. And then the application activities is only used if we're providing custom activities. So this would not be used to enable mail or to enable AirDrop on an AirDrop enabled device, etc., etc. This is only used if we are creating a custom activity. So we just pass nil here. And then once we have send activity as a view controller, we present this activity view controller just by sending the message present view controller animated and completion. The view controller is send activity that we created here. Animated, we should always animate the presentation of view controllers. And completion in this case is nil. Completion would be a block of code that I would just pass to this completion parameter that would run when this activity view controller is dismissed. So I could handle any cleanup that I want to do there. Now, a caveat. If the device, and in the case of the simulator certainly, detects no devices near on which AirDrop is enabled, only the default mail activity type will be shown. And we're going to see that here when I run right now. So let's go ahead and run it and see what's going on. I put some default text in here. This is a test. And of course I can edit this. Let's just say testing, whatever. And then I'm going to save, which dismisses our keyboard. It also enabled the send button. And now when I click on send, if AirDrop were enabled and it detected any other devices near it upon which AirDrop were enabled, AirDrop would appear as an icon here. Right now I just have the mail icon. On the version of the emulator that shipped with this version of Xcode 5 at the time of this presentation, mail is not installed on the simulator. But we can still click it and it will still bring up the default mail interface. But that's not really what we're talking about here. At this point, though, we do want to go ahead and click this. We get the default mail interface, and notice that savefile.txt is right here in the interface. And I can then add whatever I want. So it has done a very cool thing. It has attached savefile.txt to our interface. So we'll delete that draft. And now we can stop. Okay, so what about the other side? What about the receiving side? Well, it's a little bit trickier to do that. To do that, we have to do two things within our app. The first one is in info plist for the app, which we can get to by going to the info tab here, we have to enable a document type. We have to enable a document type for each type of document that we want to send. So I have enabled a text document type with the document actual UTI of public.text. I could also supply an icon here, and we should in a production application. And I would supply the standard icon size both in a regular version and also in a Retina version. So there we go. We must specify a UTI or a document type for each type that we're going to handle. Here we're only handling text, so it's okay. The next thing we have to do is we have to add a delegate method to AppDelegate. Now, we could do this in a couple of different ways. We could register for a notification in our view controller, which would probably be the cleanest way to do this. But here I'm just showing you the raw delegate method. This is a delegate method that's going to respond to any receipt of a file over AirDrop. So this one is new. Application, open URL, source application, and annotation. The three important parameters here are the first three. Application is a pointer to the current running UI application. That's us. The URL is the URL that is received via AirDrop. The source application is the application from which that URL came, and that comes over as a string. And then annotation. So now, I'm just here, it's a very simple thing I'm doing. I'm going to log out these three parameters, and then I'm going to get the file at the URL into an NS string. So let's go ahead and close this so you can see what I'm doing. Received file is our string, and that's going to be a string with the contents of URL, with the encoding that we created that URL with, a UTF-8 string, and then again we would trap the error and document what actually happened in the case of failure. Now, once you've got the file and the URL, you need to do something with the string. You could save the URL, you could delegate to some other object, and so forth. For this demo, all we're going to do is alert it out. So I've got an alert message. I've created this alert message as a string with the format of the content, and then that is received file. So that's what the content of this URL is. Now, when this file comes into the device, when it is received, it is put into a directory under the Documents directory called Inbox. That directory is not, the contents of the Inbox directory are not writable. They are read-only, and then the user, the user could, but the application that receives it can only read it and delete it, but it cannot alter it. If the application receiving it needs to alter that file, needs to make changes, then it would load in the file and then copy it to the Documents directory. Or it could delete it from here, the Inbox, and move it to the Documents directory. There is no outbox. You send directly from wherever you're going to send. But when you receive a file, it goes into a special read-only Inbox directory. So the alert just alerts out the contents of the file, puts a cancel button called OK, and then shows the alert. Apple strongly recommends that whatever you do here, even in the case of a failure, you always return yes from this Boolean method. Application open URL source application with annotation. So that's it. It's really not a big deal to send and receive content. Now the content can be anything, any type of content that you can provide a UTI for in your info plist that we showed you here before. Certain content is system only. Apple, especially with graphics types files, Apple grabs certain of those UTIs to be used only by system components. So you can't declare that you're going to pass, for example, a PNG file. You can't do that. You would have to pass some other type of graphic file. So you need to look in the documentation and see what those system UTIs are and avoid them. Thank you very much.